Hello.
Hello.
Not real. They don't call people.
Hello? Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday
Oh,
training. We're going to start here probably in the next 2 to 3 minutes. Wait for other people to join. All right, everyone, welcome to BK's Tuesday training. Today's training, we're going to focus on using our RES software to program a trunked radio. Just to keep a heads up, next Tuesday we'll be doing import-export with Microsoft Excel. And the last Tuesday of this month, we will be doing keypad programming with the radio. Next month in June, we'll be continuing these classes. We'll have conventional programming on the first Tuesday in June. The second Tuesday in June, we'll have trunking program like now, and then import-export with Excel and keypad programming. The invites and more details about that will be coming soon. Without further ado, this is the RES programming software. The current version that I have up is 5.5.3. It's a great version. It works really well. Also, version 5.5.9 is a bit later, and it works just as good as this one does. Everything will be pretty much the same. So to begin, once you have a radio connected to your computer and you turn the radio on, you will hear that the radio connects, and then in about 10 seconds or so, you should see the red light turn green. There we are. So now we can read this radio. Oh no, I grabbed the wrong radio. Stand by. I've been testing some things. All right. We'll read the radio. Not that one, too. Let's watch this one do it as well, huh? Yep. So the great thing about Res 5.5.9 is that you won't have this issue because you can turn firmware versioning off. So let's just do an impromptu how to update firmware on a radio. Here we are. So you guys are getting a little bit extra. So this is our lightning light flasher all in one. As you can see, it has control head, handheld control head, mobile, portable, and G2. So once I have the radio connected to my computer and the radio is turned off, I'm going to hold the push to talk button down and turn the radio on. When I do this, there'll be a blue light flashing on the top of my radio, and I can let go of the push to talk at that time. Then, under the event log here, I can hit start, and you can see that I'll start loading the 3 files onto the radio. First, I'll do the X loader, the kernel, and then the largest of the 3 files, the root. Once those 3 files are loaded onto the radio will then restart. If you have a batch of radios that you need to do, once you see that it's successful and the radio's powered down, you can turn that radio off, disconnect it, grab your next radio, connect it, hold the push to talk button down, turn the radio on, and hit start again. Now that we've updated this radio, I should be able to read it. What? Ah, shucks. I'm having a bad day. Stand by. 5559. Dude. I apologize for this. So normally what you would do is you would read the radio, and you know that you've successfully read the radio because you see the information from that radio populate. See if I can write. Nope. Pick the right band, Clint. There it goes. Now, here I can read the radio. I know that I successfully read the radio because my ESN updates to the serial number that's in the radio that I read. At this point in time, you can say, for example, you can save the code plug. You can go to File, and you can select Save As, and it will ask you where you want to save it. We'll save it over this. And now you've saved the code plug. In some circumstances, especially if you're working with customer service, we may send you a code plug to help you if we've made some minor changes or we think, hey, this might fix the issue that you're having. We may send you a code plug. And the easiest thing to do there is to go to File, Open, and then select the code plug that we send you. And then once your radio is connected and turned on, you can simply hit Write, and you'll write to that radio. Now, when we're talking about trunking specifically, there's some other things that we may need to do before we can write to the radio. But once the write is successful, the radio will power down and then restart with the new parameters file that we've loaded into the radio. I know that was a very clunky start, but we got there. There was a question. So can you update both files open? Can you elaborate more on that, please? You can unmute yourself if possible.
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you have both the lightning light and the RES open at the same time?
Yeah, I just did. In circumstances where I've done fleets of radios, where my goal is to update the firmware in the radio and then also put a new code plug into the radio, what I'll often do is I'll have lightning light open and I'll turn the radio on, I'll hit start, and it will do the lightning light firmware upgrade. And then once that firmware upgrade is complete, the radio will shut down and restart in regular mode. And then when it restarts in regular mode, I can then go to res. And if I'm doing trunking, for example, I can modify the unit ID that I need to put into the radio, simply press write, and then write that into the radio. Once that's complete, I can then disconnect from that radio and then connect to a different radio that I want to in the fleet that I'm updating. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great, great. Are there any other questions about just simple read, write, open, save?
I
Great.
do have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yesterday, I hadn't programmed a mobile radio. I held down the push stop, put it on, put the firmware in, and then I went over to put the software in, on the push stop again, on the radio.
I'm sorry, sir. It's very difficult to hear you. Can you speak up, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so after I put the firmware in, did the same thing, holding the push button, get the flash blue from the code plug, and when I tried to program the code plug, radio blocked up. Get that out of the
Sir, I'm sorry. You're fading in and out, and it's very difficult to hear you. If you'd like, at the end of the class, we can try to address that, or I'll give you some information, and you can send me an email, and we can discuss it better.
Well, can you hear me better now?
Much better, yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So I was goofing up yesterday. I programmed in a code plug, and I, got the flash and blue code plug, and I held down the push to top blue, or not the firmware, and then I did the same thing again. I held down the push to start the radio on to get the flash blue code plug in, which you're not supposed to do, and it locked the radio up in that mode with the blue light on, and I couldn't get it to get out of that mode. Is the hard
Okay, so I think what the question is that the gentleman had his radio in bootstrap mode. That's what we call it, with the blue light flashing, and he couldn't get it out of that mode. It was locked up in that mode. And so I will say that once the radio is in bootstrap mode, it's going to stay in bootstrap mode until Lightning Light does whatever it does to tell the radio to restart. So if you get the radio into bootstrap mode and then you have failures, or you decide, oops, that's not what I meant to do, or anything along those lines, you can either go ahead and do the firmware update, and it's not going to hurt the radio to do the same firmware over and over and over to the radio, or to go up or down and yo-yo the radio in firmware. It's not going to really hurt it that much. But if you are stuck in firmware update mode and you don't want to update the firmware, the only way to fix that is to remove the power. And on a portable radio, it's quite easy, right? We just shuck the battery off of it. But I understand, like on mobiles, it can be much more difficult to remove power from the radio. And in those instances, it's either easier just to go ahead and do the firmware update, or like I said, you got to remove power. I hope that answers your question.
It sure does. Thanks for that quick
All right.
trick there.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the res software here. So one of the great things about the res software is we can change the way it looks. When you first install the software, it'll be in what's called single channel mode. So as you can see here, I can have multiple channels in a radio, and I can select different zones here. But when I select a channel, I'm only seeing that information for that one channel at a time. And this is great for troubleshooting. If you've got a particular position on the knob that is not working the way you intend it to, single channel view is great for just focusing on that one channel and trying to determine what's going on. But most of the time, most people, they use what's called multi-channel view. If you go to view and channel view selection, you can see here you can select between channel view and multi-channel view. So here, multi-channel view, it lets us see all of the channels in the zone at once, and gives us a really quick overview of what we're looking at. It's much easier to configure your channel selections here instead of doing them one at a time. Another thing we can do is, if the font is too small or too large, we can change the font size. So here I can go to font size and increase font, or I can go to view font size and decrease font. Likewise, I can hold the control key down and I can press minus, or I can press plus. So something you'll notice with the way our software is organized is that we have these buttons on the side here. And these buttons help us organize things. If we want, when we increase the size, you'll notice that the font increases on those buttons until they're too far out of the way. And so now I have to scroll to see them. And that can be quite difficult. Come on, there it goes. So now I have to scroll down just to see them. So it is a balance that you have to keep as far as making your font size the size that you need to see and read, and not so large that you're going to spend all your time scrolling and get frustrated. So there's a give and take there that you need to be aware of. Lastly, we can go to view and we can change the color theme. So the default color theme is this dark gray and blue. But what I've noticed, especially when I'm giving classes, is that this doesn't show up very well on large displays, like if I have a projector or a large television that I'm giving a class on, and that the orange seems to show up just a little bit better. Again, these are all personal preferences, and no way, shape, or form does it affect how the radio is programmed. It just affects how you see the software, and this is all just a personal preference, if you understand. Moving on from there, when we talk about programming radios on trunking networks, the very first thing that should come to mind is that we need a system key. So a system key basically allows us to program the system ID and the WACN into the radio. It's a tool to help prevent unwanted people from programming radios onto a network. And most of the time, they're managed by the system administrator and the radio manufacturers. So in our case, we have a system key request form. If you need a system key, you'll fill out your part, you'll send it to your system administrator, they'll fill out their part, and they'll sign saying they authorize you to have a key. That's then sent to us, the factory. We'll then manufacture the key and send it back out to you. If you are a system administrator, we still need you to do the paperwork. Obviously, you're going to give yourself authority to have a system key, but we still need paperwork in place just to show that we're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. There's two main types of system keys. One is a legacy key, and one is what's called an advanced system key. The legacy key is just simply a software file that can be copied and shared and distributed. And as you can imagine, it's a little bit less secure than an advanced system key. An advanced system key normally is a hardware dongle made up of a master key and a child key. The master key's only job is to make child keys, and the child key's only job is to program radios. Child keys can be configured to have expiration dates. They can be configured to have a minimal number of writes, and they can be configured to various different things. So as you can imagine, advanced system keys are quite a bit more secure than the legacy keys. They can't be copied and distributed. Regardless of the key that you have, to load a system key, you're going to go to Tools, System Keys, and then here you can either load a legacy key. When you select that, it's going to ask for a folder. So as you can see here, I'm at my keys folder, and you don't see any keys here because we're not selecting a file, we're selecting the folder. So when I hit select folder, it's then going to tell me that it's got my keys, and it's going to tell me how many that I loaded. I happen to have 86 loaded on this particular computer. That's way more than probably anyone else is going to see. Likewise, if it's a hardware system key or an advanced system key, you'll go to Tools, System Keys, and you'll either load a USB key or a software child key. The USB key obviously needs to be plugged in. The software key is going to ask you for where the key is located. Once you have the keys loaded, you can go to View Current Permissions. From here, this is going to open up a window that has all of the keys that you have currently loaded on your computer. If it's an advanced system key, it will also list the permissions that come with that key. That's the talk group range, the unit ID range, and expiration date, read, write expirations. Are there any questions about system keys? Great. So now that we have our system key loaded, we need to add a trunking system. The easiest way to add a trunking system is you go to the System tab, and you press the +TS button. And here you'll see the trunking system is added. If you have more than one key loaded, you'll then need to select the system that you want. Here I'm going to select system number 1, WACN ID number 1. If you only have one system key loaded, it's going to automatically default to what that system is, and you don't need to change that. Once you have the system ID and the WACN loaded, here we can then configure the trunking system. At a minimum, we have to configure the channel identifier table, the control channels, and the talk group table. I say as a minimum, but we have some wiggle room there as well. So the channel ID table, that's the first button here we're going to click. When we click that up, that's going to open up our channel identifier table, also known as a band, as a band plan. This will be given to you by your system administrator or your system configurer. And basically, this is the plan for the radio. So here you will have the bandwidth, the offset, so you have plus, minus. You have the transmit offset, so you'd have like plus 30 and minus 45. I may have that backwards. And the channel spacing, and then the base frequency. If you were using a TDMA system, for example, what's recommended is that you both configure a band plan item for the FDMA, and then you configure a band plan item for the TDMA, and that will make your radio TDMA capable. Once you have the channel identifier table configured, you then need to go to the control channels and add those as well. A word about the control channels is that order matters. So if I have a bunch of control channels here listed, the way the radio is going to find the system is the very first frequency listed is the first try. If it doesn't find the system there, it's going to go to the next frequency, so forth and so on. So if you have a large statewide system, for example, it's recommended that you regionalize your control channel lists. So if you've got guys out west of your state, then you should put the west sites and their control channels first on the list, versus if you have guys on the east side of the state, you should put the east sites and their control channels first. This will aid in the radio finding a system faster and not having to ping pong and bounce around. I said that not all of it is exactly required. We can program a radio without control channels and without a channel identifier table, and simply enable full spectrum scan down here at the bottom. So what enabling full spectrum scan will do is it will cause the radio to scan the entire spectrum, looking for the system ID and WACN, looking for the system. It's not recommended that you do this because it can sometimes take the radio up to 5 or even 10 minutes to find the system. But once it's found the system, it will download the control channels that are broadcast for that system, and it will also download the channel identifier table. And then that radio will remember where it's at and remember this information that's been given, so that if you turn the radio off and turn it back on, it should find the system relatively quickly. Once we've configured our channel identifier table and our control channels, the last thing to configure is our talk group channel. This is the meat, the bread and butter. You cannot get away without programming this information. So listed here, we have the aliases. So this will be simply the name of the talk group that we're programming. So we could do things like dispatch, fire, LE. Let's do a couple of more, huh? How about CERT, training, and mutual aid. Then we will have the ID. So the ID here is listed in decimal form. So we'll have, like, say 123, 124, 125, 126, 711, and 511. Okay, so these are all decimal IDs that you'll notice. If the source data that you're having has them listed in hexadecimal, you can either use a program like Microsoft Excel to do the translating for you, or if we go up to options here, we can say show unit ID and talk group ID as hex. So now when I select that and go back to my talk group window, you can see now that my IDs are listed as hexadecimal numbers instead of decimal numbers. This happens most commonly with the older radios, the older Motorola radios, some of the older Harris radios. But even them themselves, they're moving closer to decimal and listing these as decimal. So again, to change that, we can go to options. And where it says show unit ID, talk group ID as hex, we can simply click that. And now they're back to decimal. Any questions about adding talk groups, control channels, or channel IDs identifier table to the radio? Great. So let's talk about some extras, some things that are not required, but you may want to do to help help the radio work. So the first thing we can do is we can go to the unit call table or the unit ID table. So this will allow us not only to turn on unit-to-unit calls, where we can have them do either response only operate off a list, or have them be unlimited, where they can use the physical keypad to type in the ID they want to call. If you are working with a tier 2 radio, one that doesn't have the full 12-digit keypad, you're going to need to give them list only so that they can pick from a list instead of typing it in. But that's not the only use for this table, because keep in mind, we can have different IDs calling into us. And instead of displaying the unit ID number, we can have it display things that are important to us that we want to know. So we can have it let us know that dispatch is calling us instead of 10001. Or we can have it let us know that chief is calling, or if we have like a registration number, we can have it tell us that, vehicle, we We can say like brush truck 124 is calling. Now, something to keep in mind here is that the radio is not transmitting these aliases. It's only transmitting the IDs. So if the chief's radio is no longer 1002 and it becomes, say, 1005, you're going to have to reprogram your fleet to show that number change. So be careful what you have as an alias because you may have to change it, and that can be a big ordeal. Some common ones that I think are perfectly fine to use are dispatch or base stations, because those rarely ever get swapped out. They rarely ever change unit ID numbers, and they don't move. So they're pretty much stagnant, and they stay the same the whole time. Vehicles can work as well, but I don't recommend using the registration number of the vehicle, because that radio may be pulled out of that vehicle and put into a different vehicle, and at that time you would then have to make those changes. Moving on, we have the site alias list. So the radio will receive an RF SSID and a site ID for each site that is on your system if your system has multiple sites. So instead of the radio just displaying 1-1 or 1-2, we can have it display an alias for north or south. And this is really nice for troubleshooting if you've got a radio that's going out of range, or you've got a radio that's not behaving the way you want. You can program the site display button onto the radio, and then when you do site display, instead of showing 1-1 or 1-2, it can show you north or south. It can help you easily identify the site that your radio is affiliating to and help you make a determination if it shouldn't affiliate to that or not. Lastly, we'll talk about data and OTAR. OTAR stands for over-the-air rekeying, and here we can configure that information. To configure OTAR, the first thing we'll have to do is we'll have to enable OTAR, and we're going to have to enable SNDCP registration. So what SNDCP registration does is it tells the radio that you have to register to the packet data router. We have to have a backbone that connects the radio to the IP network. And then what OTAR enable does is that it tells the radio once we're connected to a data network, we then have to attempt to register to a KMF. And in order to register to a KMF, we have to put the ID, the IP address of where the KMF may be. This is different across all systems, and your system administrator or your system configurer should know this information. The KMF UDP port of 64414 is a very common port, and you shouldn't have to change that at all. Some other things that you may want to look at is voice interrupts data. So that will ensure that voice traffic takes precedent over data. And you may want to look at doing the SNDCP registration version to 1. Although not required, it will help the radio move a bit smoother. Some other data things that we can do is we can do text messaging from a dispatch console, so they can send IP messages to the radio. We can do location registration services. So this is if the radio has GPS enabled, it will send its GPS location to the central system, and then some mapping software from there will handle the rest. Or we can even do OTAP, which is over-the-air programming. So here we could have the radio's IP address assigned and the UDP port assigned, and work from there to program the radio. Are there any questions about unit ID table, site alias table, or data and OTAR? Okay. So now that we've talked about OTAR and over-the-air rekeying, we should kind of transition into talking about encrypting. So if you want to encrypt the radio traffic of a particular channel, we first have to configure the radio to accept encryption keys. So the best way to do that is first click on to Global, and then we click on Keys here. And this will bring up the Global Common Keys window. The window is broken into 3 main parts. The first part is what we call the key index table. The second part we would call the FIPS or non-FIPS key table. And then the last part is the OTAR information, KMF information table. So the way this works is under the key index table, we can assign an SLN to a key index number. The SLN is also known as a CKR. So we can assign a number here like 32, or we can assign even just like number 1. We can assign an alias to this. But it doesn't really matter as far as that's concerned. So once we have our index table configured, we can then assign those keys. If we're going to be using something like ADP encryption, we can also add that key at this time. So when I click add row here, this is my non-FIPS information. If I've read my radio and the radio already has encryption keys in it, those keys will also be displayed here. So here I have to make the SLN match. So here the SLN for my ADP key is going to be 32. I'm going to select the RCE, that's the radio compatibility encryption, the same thing as ADP. And then I have to select the key ID. Now keep in mind that the key ID and the SLN don't have to match, but they do have to match that of the other radios. So for example, if you have Motorola radios using ADP encryption, you need to make sure that the SLN and the key ID of the ADP encryption that those radios are using matches the radios here. And lastly, we can type in the key information or the key material. This is a 10-digit number that can support anything you like. It's a hexadecimal number, so it also supports letters as well. It's recommended that you don't make this the phone number of your firehouse or anything like that. It makes it really, really easy to crack. So now that I have my SLN here, you can see that I have it assigned to key index number 1. And then lastly over here is our KMF information. So here's where we can put the KMF RSI, which is most commonly all 9s. We can put the radio RSI. It's commonly the same as the radio's unit ID. And then we have the M&P port, the M&P, which is the message number protocol. And if you select 65535, that is the maximum, and it pretty much just tells the radio we're not going to use that feature set. Again, this information will be provided to you by your system administrator or your system configurer. Once we have a key here set on our key index number, we then need to assign it to our talk groups. To assign it, first we'll close this window, we'll go back to System, select Talk Groups, and then we can select the talk groups that we want to encrypt. So for example, if we want to encrypt fire with the county key that we created earlier, we need to use key index number 2. So remember, under county, even though the SLN is number 1, the key index number is number 2. So we'll need to use number 2. If we want to use our ADP key to encrypt, say, law enforcement and CERT, then we need to select number 1 for those. Likewise, we need to change the strapping over here. So here it's strapped to clear. Well, we can change it to secure or selectable. It's recommended that you set it to secure, so that will avoid having users have their radio set in different ways. So if one radio is set to clear and one radio is set to secure, both users may think they're talking encrypted, but only one is. Where if you set it to secure instead of selectable, you know for a fact they're going to be set to secure. Any questions about how to do encryption, how to do ADP, or how to configure a key to a talk group? Great. So now that we have our talk groups configured the way we want, and we have our system configured the way we want, we have our encryption keys where we want them, now it's time to assign these talk groups to zones and channels inside our radio. We'll do this by clicking on the Zone tab, and here we can add or subtract zones by hitting the +Z button or hitting the -Z button. Stand by. So there was a question, can you use the SLN more than once? No. So if you already have an SLN or a CKR for a key that you're already using, so for example, I'm already using SLN 32, And if I need, if I have an AES key that also has the SLN or CKR of 32, then I'm going to need to change my ADP key, or I'm going to need to try to resolve this this duplicate, because the radio only sees the addressing once. The SLN is the address. The key is stored into the radio, and we can't have more than one key living in the same address. It confuses the radio. I hope that answers your question. Back to our zones. So like I said, we can add zones or subtract zones. We can also configure our zones. So if we go to zone settings here, we can open up the settings for our zone. So here we can change the alias to whatever we want. And then we can also change the index. So if I have my main zone and I don't want it to be the third zone in the radio, I can select this drop down and I can move it to number 1. So now if I look at my listing, main is number 1, zone 1 was drop down 1, and zone 2 was drop down as well. Any questions about zone adding, deleting, zone indexing? Zone indexing is great if you have what I would call like a master template, where you have a statewide system and you have all of the different counties inside your code plug, and then you just need to make sure that, like, hey, this is going to this particular county. Well, then you just go to the zone index and you make theirs up to number 1, and you hand it to them and they'll be happy. And then we have a different county, so you just go to that county's zone and you change the index up to number 1, you hand it out to them, and they'll be happy as well. It makes reorganizing the zones without deleting anything really easy. Once we have our zone, we then need to add channels. We can add channels a couple of different ways. We can hit the +CC, that's for control channel, or we can hit the +TC for trunking channel, or I can hit the +-C here. So what the +-C allows me to do is it allows me to add a range. So for example, if I want 1 through 5 and channel 16 to be our trunking channels, I can go to here, I can select trunking system, and then select add. And here you'll see that 1 through 5 was added, and then channel 16 was added as well. Then if I want to fill in the gap with conventional channels, for example, I can do 6 through 15, select the conventional system and hit add, and then it will fill in the gaps. Keep in mind that you don't have to program channels between 5 and 16 if you want to leave that space. If a user selects the channel knob 6, it's just going to say that that channel is unprogrammed. Likewise, if I want to delete a bunch of channels, I can select the channels that I want to delete and then hit delete. If you have more than one trunking system loaded to your code plug, you'll see them listed here as well. Once I have my trunking channels assigned, I then need to assign the talk groups for each channel. To assign the talk group, I can simply go to the talk group here. I select from the drop down and I select the one that I want. I can either do that, or most of the time your channel talk group listing is going to be way longer than the one I've done for this example. So also we can type it in. So I can type in 123, 124, 125, 126, 127. We didn't have that, did we? We had what was it? Was it 511? There it is. So we can type those in like that, like so, and then we have them assigned. Now, as you see, as I was assigning the talk groups here, we automatically update the label to the alias we have in our trunking table. If I want to, I can go in and I can edit this and I could change it to something else. And that works just fine. But keep in mind that if I reselect, or if I select something different, I should say, it's going to change that back to the default. Any questions about how to add and assign talk groups to a channel? Okay, moving on. So now that we have our zone channel assignment configured, we can configure our scan list. We cannot configure scanning until the zone channel assignment is done. So to configure the scan list, we click on System, we click on the trunking system we want to configure, and then we click on the scan list button. From here, we have to add a scan list. Keep in mind we can have multiple scan lists. and then we can add a row to that scan list. From here, we can select the zone and then the channel we want within that zone. Now, there are a couple of different types of scanning. You have priority scanning or non-priority scanning. So for the priority type, we can either have programmed. So this is whatever we have selected to be the priority channel. We have selected. So this means that whatever channel position or main channel position the radio is on will be the priority channel. And then we have non-priority, which means it will not assign priority at all. For priority scanning to work on a trunking system, your trunking system has to support priority scanning. Most modern systems do, but in the rare occasions, yours may not. We can select the priorities here. We can simply say which one we want to be the priority, and that's the index listing here. So if I want LE to be the priority number 1, I would select number 2. And if I want the CERT to be priority number 2, I would select the third one. For talkback type, we can either talk back on the selected channel. So that is whatever the position knob is on your radio. When you hit the push to talk, that's what you're going to talk on. Or we can have it talk on the active channel. So that means that if you are scanning and you hear different traffic and you push to talk within the scan hold time, you will talk on that other channel. So for example, if I am selected to dispatch and I'm scanning and something happens on the fire channel, if I key within the scan hold time, I will then key up on fire. The scan hold time can be set here, and we can change it in seconds. 2 is normally about where you want to be, or 1.5. This requires a lot of training for your users, and they have to understand what they're doing. So you have to trust your users quite a bit if you're going to do this. Also, we can have the radio beep when it receives the priority channel. So in this case here, if I'm scanning and there's activity on the LE network, I'm going to hear a beep first to let me know that my priority is coming through, and then I will hear the traffic. Once I've created the scan list the way I want, I then have to assign it to a particular, I then have to assign it to the channel. So my scan list is built. I'll close this out, go back to zone, and then here where it says scan list, I can assign number 1. Now, if I have a whole bunch here, the easiest thing to do is once I have that configured, I can right click on it, go to copy parameter, and then copy to all. Boom. So now my scan list is copied to all on the list. This is really great to do, especially if you give the users in their menu the priority scan list edit feature. So if you're going to allow them to edit the scan list, you want to assign that scan list to all of the channels in the radio so that they have all of the channels of radio available to select. Any questions about scanning and the scan list? Great, moving on. One of the nicest features of the P25 system on a trunking system is it allows us to send data to a central network. And then that central network can handle that data and do some interesting things with it. One of the more common things is the emergency feature. So it's normally programmed to the orange button on top, and when that orange button is pressed, that radio is in emergency mode. So to enable emergency on the radio, we have to go to the system and then the trunking system, and then we have to enable the emergency call. It's also a really good idea to also enable the emergency call cancel. That will allow the radio to send a cancel command from the radio. We offer an emergency hot mic, so when selected, the radio is going to automatically key up on the designated channel, whether it's the selected channel or if it's the emergency revert that I'll show you in a minute, and it's going to key for the designated amount of time. Here we have the hot mic transmit period set to 10 seconds. Well, we can go all the way up to 120 seconds if we want. I don't recommend going too far because you're going to then essentially jam the network, right? So at 10 seconds, the radio is going to automatically key, and then for 10 seconds, the mic's going to be hot. This is great if you're in a situation where you don't want the aggressor to know that you're in an emergency situation, or this is great for in a situation where you need 2 hands on a firearm, or you need both hands active and you're in an emergency situation, you can press the button. It will then hot mic. You've got 10 seconds to say whatever you need to emergency responders or whoever's listening, most commonly the dispatcher, and let them know, help, 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 or give details to your situation. After the 10 seconds is up, the radio will dekey, but that radio is still in an emergency mode. If you take the battery off, put the battery back on, you key it up, the radio is still going to be in emergency mode. You have to press and hold the orange key for a longer period of time. The radio will show emergency canceled, and it will cancel out the emergency. If you want, you can use something called emergency revert. So what if we have like an emergency talk group that only handles emergency traffic? So I go to my talk group listing here, and let's create an emergency talk group. Let's give it a trunking ID. How about 911? That's a fun one, right? So now I can go to my zone channel assignment, and where I see emergency group listed here, I can change this to 911. So that means that when I'm on these channels and I press the orange button, it's going to automatically go to the emergency group, even though the emergency group is not added to my talk group listing. So we can have it where the only way for your user to access this talk group with their radio is to press the orange button. And you can have your dispatcher with a dedicated emergency channel, so the only traffic they hear is from people who have pressed the orange button. Do you have any questions about how emergency works? Awesome. So once you have your zone channel assignment configured and your system is configured, the last step before you're ready to write to the radio is to configure your menus, buttons, and displays. So to configure your menus, you click on the menu button. Now it's very important to note that there's two separate kinds of menus. There's conventional menus and there's trunking menus. So you have to make sure that you select the right menu selection when you want to configure for trunking or conventional channels. It's recommended to keep these as congruent as possible so that your users don't get confused when they turn a channel knob from a trunking channel to a conventional channel and they go, wait a minute, where did all my menu items go? The easiest way to set a menu, what I do is the first thing I do is I hit remove all, because we don't need zone select or channel select in the menu. We just hit remove all. And then we can add ones that are interesting to us, like the backlight, the battery life. We can add priority scan list edit that allows the user to edit the scan list. We have radio info. This is really good if you are using OTAR, because radio info will show the radio's ID, the radio's assigned IP address, and whether or not the radio has registered to the KMF. And that's basically the 3 steps of troubleshooting OTAR is, do I have an ID, do I have an IP address, and am I registered to the KMF? The rest of it's pretty much gravy after that. And lastly, if you want, you can do things like site search or the versions here. If you're using encryption keys, you may want to put zeroized keys. That will delete all the encryption keys off the radio. So if you're having an issue or you need something, you can do that to delete the keys off. Once we have our menus, the very next thing we have to do is go into buttons and make sure that we assign a button for a menu, because then all that time we wasted picking the perfect menu will be, well, just that, wasted. And just like the menus, we have to make sure that we select the trunking and conventional. So we can set different buttons up for conventional and different buttons up for trunking. And again, it's recommended that we make these as congruent as possible so that as the user turns the knob, they don't go, hey, where did my zone button go? Or where did this button go? So like I said, the first thing I do is I make sure I have a menu button. The square button is my favorite for this. And then if I have multiple zones like I do in this code plug, I need to assign a zone select button. And I like to use the diamond. As you see, they're all listed here in alphabetical order. So I can either scroll to the bottom or I can simply just press Z and it takes me straight to zone select. Some other buttons that would be really nice to have is a site display. So this will display the current site that the radio is affiliated to. And this is great for troubleshooting and just figuring out how the radio is acting. Site display will also display the RSSI. So keep in mind that the RSSI is the received signal strength indicator, and it will be displayed in dBms. So the highest dBm measurement that the radio will make is -88. So you may even see it say greater than -88. And the lowest it will show is -106. So you may even see it show less than -106. I would venture to say that a really, really, really good signal is around that greater than -88, and an okay, it works signal goes down to about 100 to 101, and anything lower than 101 is considered a poor signal, and you're going to get less than desirable performance out of the radio at that point. And then likewise, if we have OTAR programmed into the radio, it's always recommended to have the rekey request. And I like to put that on a button, but you can also put it in the menu as well. And this will allow you yourself, when you're configuring the radio, to send a rekey request command from the KMF, or it'll allow your users out in the field, if their radio is not behaving the way they want, you can just instruct them, hey, do a rekey request, and then once that's completed, your radio should work the way you want it to. If you're using the emergency button, we can set the presses and time. So we have the regular button press, and we can say how long it takes. So I can say that they have to hold the orange button for 2.5 seconds just to activate the emergency. And the long button press, that clears the emergency out. So I can say they have to hold that button for 4 seconds to clear the emergency out. This can prevent accidental bumps. And you should probably experiment with this to get that timing the way you want it, to help you and your users prevent accidental emergencies, but also not make it so difficult that they can't actually initiate the emergency if they're in one. The last thing I have for you is the display. So if we click on Global, we'll see that we have a conventional tab and then a P25 trunking tab. And this is where we can configure the display. Again, I recommend that we keep this congruent as to not confuse people. My favorite is to do the zone label first, then the channel label, and then lastly the unit ID. So this will display the unit ID of the radio you have, and it will display the unit ID of any incoming traffic that you receive. Any incoming traffic that you receive. We also have our alternate lines here, so we can add additional information, and it will just flash between the two. And then a great troubleshooting tool is the roaming notifications. So here we see the site trunking. So if the system goes into site trunking, the radio is going to play a tone, and it's also going to display that the radio is in site trunking. Or if the radio goes out of range, it will display out of range, and it will also give a tone to let you know the radio is out of range. Likewise, for roaming notifications, we can do display only, tone only, or display in tone. And what this will do is this will tone and display every time the radio registers, affiliates, does a location registration, a location affiliation, or any denied responses it gets from the system. It's not recommended that you have this turned on and you give this to your customers, your regular out on the beat users, because this will make your radio beep and bonk all the time. And the more noises a radio makes, the more likely it's broken, is the mantra of a user. But this is great for us as techs and as troubleshooters, because if the radio is going out of range all the time and you're like, I'm standing right underneath the tower, it shouldn't be going out of range, we can turn on roaming notifications and we can see that that site is sending a deny to the radio. It's saying you're not allowed on this site, and the radio can't see any other sites, so it just goes out of range. And knowing that it's denied knows that, well, I need to go back and configure my system to allow the radio, and you can work with it that way. So roaming notifications is a great troubleshooting tool, but I don't recommend programming it into your users' radios. Do I have any questions about menus, buttons, or displays? Awesome. So we've now got our code plugged the way we want. We go up, we go to File, we go Save, we save it. We're happy, right? Now we've got to program this code plug into a fleet of radios. But remember, the big difference between a trunking system and say a conventional system is the trunking system, we also have to assign a unique unit ID to each of our radios. We have to make sure that we don't have duplicate IDs, and we have to do this. So the easiest way to do this is I simply click on the trunking system. I have my IDs here. I select the ID, and I can hit write. Once it's written to the radio is going to shut down. I can turn the radio off, disconnect it, grab the next radio that I want to program, connect it up. Why did that time out? Try that again. Looks like I'm having trouble with my computer today. What a great day to have trouble. There it goes. The radio is now powering off. I would turn the radio off, disconnect, grab a new radio, connect that up, and then once the new radio is connected and ready to go, I would change the ID to the new ID that I want to have programmed, hit write, and then it would program that radio as well. And you keep going down the list. If your radio has, if you're using OTAR for your radio, then you would have to set the unit ID, then click on global keys and make sure that you set the RSI as well to whatever you've been assigned by your system administrator. Most commonly, it's the same as the unit ID. Simply hit write again, rinse and repeat over and over again. Now, we do offer batch programming. So what batch programming can do is we can go to our file, we can open up, and we can open up, say, this one here. So this is a code plug that I've previously created. So it has all my trunking systems, it has my system IDs in it, and then it has my my unit ID. So from here, I can hit start, start programming, and I can increase the conventional ID or the P25 ID if it has a radio name, like Fire 1. I can then have it increase. So the next one that it does is Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, and so forth. And if I'm doing KMF OTAR, I can have it do there. So it'll program 1001, then 1002, so forth and so on. Just hit start batch programming, go from there. It's a really great tool to quickly program a whole fleet of radios really fast. But keep in mind, it can go too fast, and you can get a memory mismatch. You can get blue screens. So you still have to take your time and go slow. The number one rule of thumb whenever you're programming radios or connecting a radio to your computer is always have the radio turned off when you connect it to your computer, and then turn it on. And then when you go to disconnect, always make sure that your radio is turned off before you disconnect it from your computer. If you forget to do it, oopsie, once or twice, it's not the end of the world, but you are opening yourself up to some risk. Last thing I'll show is if we have, is there any questions about how to write to radios? Okay, so here we have a portable code plug. We have it configured exactly the way we want, but we've got mobile radios that we need to program as well. So we can take this code plug that we've already generated, has all our system information in it, has most of the talk group information in it, has a lot of the zone channel assignment stuff that we want. We can go up to options, radio type, and then we can select mobile. So now this is a mobile code plug. I know because I see a mobile accessory down here at the bottom. And when I click on buttons, I now have a mobile radio here. Now, when you select between portable and mobile, it's recommended that you save your code plug first and save it as portable. And then when you move it over to mobile, you then save that code plug separately as a mobile code plug. One of the big differences between the two code plugs, everything else is going to be almost identical except for the buttons, obviously because we have different buttons on the mobile than we do the portable. So you'll have to go in and you'll have to edit your buttons. Keep in mind that here I have F4 set to be the menu button, but I do not need a menu button here because I already have a menu button hard programmed on the side that's always going to be there. So I can select that menu button and I can go down to something else like, say, nuisance delete. That'll delete a channel from your scan list temporarily. And also remember, we have P25 and conventional configuration, so you'll need to do both. The last thing I'll show you is probably one of the most important things I'll show you all day long. So pipe up and watch this. So whenever you're programming a radio and it doesn't work, it probably doesn't work because you forgot a checkbox somewhere, or you forgot a tick mark, or you forgot something and you don't remember, hey, where is this at? Where is this at? So we can hit Control F, and that takes us to the search. And I can search for the parameter like I want to turn unit to unit call on. So if I can type in unit call, and then see here I've got conventional unit call, P25 trunking. That's the main menu. That's not what I want. Let's see here. Unit call key. That's the there. That's what I want. So when I select it, it's going to instantly take me to my system, open up the unit call window, and then it highlighted the key so I know how to change the encryption key. Likewise, if I was doing like off-hook scanning, for example, I can hit Control F and I can select off-hook scan enable. There we go. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to take me straight to where I can turn that off and on. So it's really convenient if you're just looking for that check mark or you're looking for that thing and you can't remember where you put it. Just remember Control F will help you get there. That's all I have for today's class. If we have any questions or answers, I'll ask anything you have. It doesn't even have to be about trunking. Just keep it to radios if you don't mind. I don't want to talk about sports. Do you have any questions at all, comments, concerns? Okay, great. That's all I have for you. Thanks for attending. And keep in mind, next Tuesday, we'll be doing import, export with Excel. So we'll be looking at programming conventional and trunking, doing import, export with Excel. So if you're doing trunking programming, especially from scratch, I recommend that you attend that class because it's going to give you some pro tips to make things go super fast. So with that, I bid you all adieu. Be safe. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.